Welcome to Chapter 4. Again, thank you for the feedback for Chapter 3. The class did really well on the last exam and on the assignment. I really appreciate your work. A lot of you went above and beyond on the research with the global information for Chapter 3. I hope to see the same efforts in this very important chapter, Chapter 4, on business formation. This chapter, I think, is particularly important to many of you, as I think about half of you have stated interest in starting your own business. So this is a particular particular chapter of interest for you because of learning the pros and cons of different ways of starting a business. As I continue to improve things a little bit as I go with this class, I've decided to give you some hyperlinks here and there. So for example, form of business formation, when you access this PowerPoint file on Canvas, when you click here, you'll be able to go straight to the area to create your business plan, and that's through the Small Business Administration. We talked a little bit about the SBA before, sba.gov. There are several great websites, federal websites, government websites to help small business people starting. And so this is one of them, and it helps you directly with your business plan. So that's the first thing. And the other one is also going to be the ebook access. So again, trying to streamline things a little bit for you. So by clicking here on the ebook, you should be getting straight into, here it is, directly into the OpenStax Chapter 1 ebook right there. So you can follow everything here. I know you have the information as well at home, but just again, trying to streamline everything. So let's get started. This chapter is really basically a lot about definition and in terms of definition of formation of business, but also the pros and cons, like I mentioned earlier. There will be some application questions, scenarios about somebody trying to start something, really concerned about liability, and so then you'll know which might work best. So the learning outcome for this chapter, very straightforward. The different types of business formation, the pros and cons of each type. We'll look at several, not all of them, there's lots, but the big ones: sole proprietorship, partnership, corporation, franchising, and a few others, LLCs, for example. And then we'll get into mergers and acquisitions as options for growth as part of the chapter. The first thing that we'll learn is that the basic one is a sole proprietorship, right? So you want to start a business, you have some money, and you want to start as soon as possible. This is the fastest, easiest way to do it. It's a sole proprietorship. It is established, owned, operated, and often financed by one person, and it accounts for 72% of all businesses in the United States. If you think about it, one of the reasons we do have the SBA, Small Business Administration, sba.gov, the reason we have this is because the SBA is funded by taxpayer dollar, right? So when you're paying that federal tax, what you're getting back here is help from the federal government in terms of how to start a business. Again, a real amazing resource for anybody who's interested in planning, starting a business. So again, the reason I point this out is because it is critical to the economy of the United States that people are engaged and want to start their own business. And this is this is the most popular. Although the revenue in the United States, most of the revenue and sales comes from corporation. We'll look at that in just a second. The jobs in terms of mom and pop shops, that the lifeblood of the United States, the backbone of the United States, is small business. Partnership is another way to go. So here we have two or more people who agree to operate a business together. You have different setups here: general partnership, all partners share in the management profit, and then the limited, two types. One has more general partner, one or more general partner has unlimited, and the other one limited, and the one with the limited liability can limit the amount of their investments. If you think about many reasons why you would have a partnership, think about maybe someone has a skill, the experience, the other person comes in with the money, or maybe let's use an example of a CPA. someone who gets an accounting degree, gets their CPA, and has been successful as a CPA, let's say, for a while, and now they want to expand and they want to give financial advice. So now you need someone who's less accounting and more finance, who has the right credentials, and you might partner with that person. You're in charge of the accounting stuff, they're in charge of the finance stuff. Next, here, let's look at the pros and cons of sole proprietorship. Again, the appeal of it is very easy and it's not very expensive to get started. All the profits go to the owner. The owner has complete control, freedom from government regulations for the most part, compared to corporations, etc. No special taxes, and very easy to dissolve. I put it in red. The biggest disadvantage of sole proprietorship is unlimited liability. And that's where really, maybe what happens is you start as a sole proprietor, and when you start, you live with your parents, fresh out of college, or while you're in college, and you don't really have a lot of assets. But now maybe the business has really picked up, and you start to build, and you have assets. And so you are making yourself really liable if there is litigation and they decide to come after your personal assets. So that's the problem with sole proprietorship. You're not covered. Difficulty in raising capital. Banks, sometimes you come in, unless you have a really just a great business plan, it's going to be a little bit hard to raise that capital. Limited managerial expertise. Small business people who are sole proprietor wear many, many, many hats, right? They start the business, they run the business, they become the person who's in charge of the inventory, of cleaning, of driving, everything, right? And so they're trying to run many, many things, and often they don't know how to optimize, right? Not maximize, but optimize. How to allocate resources in an effective and efficient manner so they get a greater return on their investment, their time. Trouble finding qualified employees, another issue. Personal time commitment, unstable business life, and losses that all go to the owner. If you lose, it affects you. Maybe you've worked for someone who owns their own business, and you come to realize very quickly that often the person is not very skilled at delegating. And one of the reasons is this is their pride and joy, and the stakes are high, and they'll say, "Let me just do it," and then they'll do it, which is not a good way to motivate. The partnership. Let's look at the pros and cons of partnership. Right, ease of formation, same thing. Now you're getting a little bit more capital because there's two people involved. The skills and expertise, the example I gave earlier about accounting versus finance, same flexibility, no special taxes, and pretty much same aspect of relative freedom from government control. Again, I put it in red, unlimited liability. That's the big problem right there. Now you got two people. This is like a relationship, and there's ups and downs. And maybe after a while or early on, partners have divergent opinions about what they want to do with the profit, or one wants to reinvest all of the profits in growth. The other one wants to capitalize on that. So again, the sharing of the profit, and difficulty in leaving or ending a partnership is another disadvantage. This is what it looks like, right? The relative percentage of sole partnerships in the U.S. 3/4 of all businesses in the U.S. are sole proprietorships, about 10% partnerships, and the rest corporation. So again, the heavy lifting here is these sole proprietors. It's the little guy, is small businesses and partnerships. This is the same information, and you have here the table showing you they're 72% sole proprietor, 10% partnership, 18% corporations. That's the overall number. But now when you start to look at sales, right? Sole proprietor is 4% of sales, corporations 81%, and about 60% of all profits are generated by corporations. I wanted to, when you start to look at these numbers and you kind of get lost a little bit, and so we know the big names, the big corporations, but sometimes it's hard to grasp really truly what that means. So what I did here for you is I thought, let me just kind of take the top three. So this is the date, yesterday's date for me looking up the market capitalization rate, the market cap for Microsoft, for Apple, and for Google, And Google, by the way, is owned by Alphabet, and the ticker is Google. And if you look at that number right there, as of yesterday, Microsoft is the only corporation on the planet that is worth $1 trillion. Apple is almost worth $1 trillion, and Google, same thing. And what I did here is, I looked at, the list of countries by nominal GDP. And by looking at the list, what you discover is that Microsoft, if Microsoft were a country, it would be the 17th economic power on the planet. Microsoft's economy is greater than Netherlands, it's greater than Saudi Arabia, Switzerland, Turkey, Taiwan, Poland, Sweden. This is the sequence in terms of number 17, 18, 19, 20, etc. So out of almost 2 countries on the planet, Microsoft, if it were a country, would rank as the 17th economic power in the world when looking at the market capitalization rate. Maybe that helps understand why those numbers are ginormous, right? Corporations and sales and profits. All right, moving on. So corporation is a legal entity subject to the laws of the state in which it's formed. Stockholders own the company. A lot of times students think, well, the CEO, etc., just very important. It is the stockholders that own the companies. In fact, the stockholders have so much power that through the board sometimes, with enough pressure, they can get the CEO, who happens to be the founder and creator of the company, they can get that person removed, right? I believe that happened with Carl's Jr. Carl Karcher was the creator founder of Carl's Jr. and the board had him removed. This is, I think, in the 90s. So the limited liability company as an LLC is very, very popular. It's a hybrid organization that offers the same liability protection as a corporation, but may be taxed as either a partnership or a corporation. So I think hopefully you start to see where this is heading, right? When we start to look at the pros and cons, corporations, that's great because the owners are separate from the decision makers, for example, and liability is extremely limited, right? But they're very complex to form, etc. On the other hand, sole proprietorship, you do that in a very short amount of time. It doesn't require a lot of money. You don't have a lot of regulations involved. Taxation is very straightforward, but again, the big problem is liability. So what LLCs did and C-type corporations, I won't get into C-type too much this time. It's in the book for those of you who are really interested, but I'm trying to streamline the lectures a little bit. So LLCs are really very popular, LLCs and C-types. So let's look at corporations. Again, the advantage, here it is in green, limited liability, ease of transferring ownership, unlimited life. They will outlive their founders, tax deductions, they attract financing. One of the big drawbacks is double taxation. All corporations are subject to double taxation of profit. Cost and complexity of formation, again, it's really, really lengthy process, complicated. Usually you have to get lawyers and accountants involved and lots of government restrictions. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. The federal government of the United States, Securities and Exchange Commission, there was a Securities and Exchange Act in the early 1900s. Actually, I believe this was after the Great Depression. And the Securities and Exchange Act created the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the responsibility of the SEC was to ensure that our investments are safe, we're not being taken advantage of. And so that's how you end up with more government restrictions there. So let's see if you guys can guess. I have a little map here. Which of all the 50 states has the most registered corporation? So again, I have a hyperlink here with the answer, and let's see if it pops up quickly enough. It is Delaware, right? The state of Delaware is the one that has the most corporations.
Hey fools, Max Chatzko here, answering the question.
I had, again, I'm not going to play it now, but for those of you, when you follow the PowerPoint slides and you click on the hyperlink, you will see somebody from the Motley Fools, which is an investment advice type of organization, explain why there's so many companies in Delaware. But there's this Delaware loophole. There's all kinds of reasons why. So next time you get a bill from your credit card company, their headquarters might be in Texas, might be in California. But what's interesting is even if their headquarters is not in Delaware, very often the company the corporation will be formed and maintained there for tax advantages, etc. So franchising, let's get into franchising now. I'm sure everybody's familiar with franchising. First thing that usually comes to mind for students is McDonald's. Yes, it's a franchise. And if you think about a franchise, it can be a really smart move, especially if you're going with a name that works, like, for example, McDonald's or Subway's. And they're very expensive, some more than others. McDonald's is very expensive. We're talking millions of dollars by the time you're done. Than others, Subway, cheaper, Quiznos, even cheaper. It's somebody else's name. It's a kind of a winning recipe. You don't have the control. That's one of the drawback, but they're very attractive if you just want something that's very, what we call a turnkey operation. I want to buy it. I want to turn the key. I want it to work. So the company supplies the product. They train you. If you want to Google it, check out McDonald's Hamburger University. It's a benchmark in franchising in terms of how the company trains owners and managers, right? A franchise agreement is what's required. It's a contract allowing the franchisee to use the franchisor's name and trademark and logo. Again, that's going to come with restrictions. If you buy McDonald's and let's say you're right next to Disneyland and you decide you want to put a bunch of posters of Mickey Mouse and Goofy, that might not fly. If McDonald's has very strict policies and rules about decor and its own brand, and so you're going to be restricted. You have to make sure that there's exceptions for themes, but you always have to check with headquarters and make sure you don't violate the agreement. What's good about it, again, increased ability for franchisor to expand. Many franchisees are interested, which means that if you're a franchisor, you can really expand your business quickly as franchisees keep gobbling up locations. There's a recognized name, product, and operating concept. So think about something we call brand equity in marketing, right? Brand equity. Brand equity, basically, if you want to just kind of go to the essence of it, in fact, this happened to Ford Motor Company. Ford Motor Company, one of the many reasons that it avoided the bankruptcy that GM and Chrysler faced was that it actually used its brand as leverage. So for several months, I can't remember which bank, but what Ford did is it gave up its copyright temporarily for a giant loan, and that's how one of the many ways it was able to get out of bankruptcy. And so that's because Ford has brand equity. The brand has a lot of value, and the banks were willing to lend Ford millions of dollars just using the brand as leverage. Management training and assistance is something else we just talked about, Hamburger U, and financial assistance from the franchisor. The franchisor has every reason for this to work, and so they'll help the franchisee. Disadvantage, loss of control. That's a big one. Lots of articles here about how, in fact, I think this one is, I don't want to make a mistake, but I believe it's Burger King in Germany. Here we go. So this is an interesting one. Why Burger King just shut down 89 of its franchises in Germany. So this happened a few years back in 2014. And poor hygiene, poor treatment of staff, etc. So if you think about that example, Burger King ran out of, it didn't have any control over how its franchisees were operating, or it didn't exercise the control. And that really hurt the brand, right? If you want that brand equity in Germany, and this makes the headlines, not good for business. There's the course of franchising. I just discussed that. Just Google for fun. Google cost of buying a McDonald's franchise. By the time you're done, we're talking over $2 million easy. And then compare that to Subway. There's this 7-Eleven. There's a bunch of other franchises out there that are, in terms of price point, cheaper. The UPS store is actually one of the fast-growing franchises in the United States. It's another one too that my understanding is a lower overhead and fast growth in terms of amount of franchises opening. And again, restricted operating freedom. I just talked about that. The mergers and acquisitions as options. So mergers and acquisitions, when two or more firms combine to form one company. So we know, I think you guys have heard of M&As. We spend a little bit more time talking about M&As in my global business class. Obviously, it's a very popular tool when you want to gain a foothold in another country, right? You can try to build it from scratch there, but often it's a smarter move for you to either acquire or merge. Uh, about 97% of all M&As are acquisitions. Just think about that for a second. About 97% of all M&As are acquisition, and it kind of makes sense. If a company acquires another company, it controls it. That's easy. We're done. But mergers are a little bit more complicated because you have two entities merging and trying to kind of cohabitate, and they don't always last. In fact, very often they end up becoming acquisitions. So for mergers, you have a bunch of examples. This is an example that I had about, let's see, Miller, yes. So InBev, so if you think about Anheuser-Busch, right, Budweiser, and you think about Miller, well, they're now, owned by the same company. And so SAB Miller and AB InBev shareholders approved $100 billion plus merger. So this was a merger, not an acquisition, right? And so AB InBev is now almost half of global beer profit, right? Which, by the way, you might want to start thinking about antitrust, right? Well, is this when the company has just too much power and maybe competition is harder to come across, and when things become anti-competitive, that's when the Department of Justice steps in. However, this was approved. So that's an example of, in this case, a merger, not an acquisition. When you look at Chrysler, when Chrysler came out of bankruptcy, Fiat started very, very slowly merging with Chrysler. Sergio Marconi, who was the CEO of Fiat at the time, played a huge role in orchestrating the bailout of Chrysler. And he also helped by financing part of it via Fiat. Well, little by little, he turned that help into a merger and then eventually an acquisition. Today, Chrysler Jeep is owned by Fiat. So again, reiterating that many times a merger becomes an acquisition eventually. Or a horizontal merger is companies at the same stage. So you have different types of merger. Let me recap. Different types: horizontal, vertical, and leverage buyout. So a leverage buyout is an acquisition. Sorry, usually it's not a merger. So the horizontal and the vertical merger, and just think visually. Even if you don't know what the words mean, what a horizontal merger might mean. And this is when, if you think about two like companies merging, right? And so the example that I put here at the bottom left is in 2012, Facebook acquired Instagram for $1 billion. Well, these are, they're both similar enough, right, that they're considered one of the big horizontal mergers of IT. On the other hand, a vertical merger that hasn't happened yet is the AT&T acquisition of Time Warner. That is a great example of a current vertical merger. You have a company buying another firm in the same industry that is involved in an earlier or later stage of production or sales process. So here you have a telecom company that does not have content. Time Warner is an entertainment company, has content. It's not a telecom company. And so the two of them together really kind of complement each other, right? And so at least in that way, this is when you hear the word synergy, what corporations are always looking for: synergy. Lastly, you have a leverage buyout. So Blackstone Group is a private equity company. It's one of the biggest on the planet, and they own a lot of stuff. They own Michaels. They own the Legoland. I mean, the list is huge. And a while back, they bought Hilton, the Hilton hotels, right? So in 2007, Blackstone Group bought the Hilton hotel. The problem is, well, not a problem. What you learn in finance, it's always a smart idea to use other people's money, i.e. the bank. And so what the Hilton did is they brought in $5 billion worth of cash, but they leveraged $20 billion worth of debt. So if you think about, that's a pretty sizable ratio right there, right? And so about a quarter was cash, the rest was debt, if you want to kind of look at it that way almost. And so they went through and in '07 ended up acquiring Blackstone that way. Last year, they sold Hilton, and they sold it for $1.3 billion. So already think about how much they bought the thing for, right? It was between the debt and the cash, about 26 billion dollars. Now they sold it for 1.3, and they earned a $14 billion profit on the sale. And so that's what these guys did in terms of a leverage buyout. Leverage buyout are not as popular as they used to be. In the 80s, I mean, that's where you find a lot of big examples of leverage buyout, 80s and early 90s. They've kind of lost popularity. There's been, again, sometimes companies overpaying through leverage buyouts. Let's see. The last slide that I have here is a clip. I won't play it now. It's I think a fun clip. It's John Oliver, who's a comedian, and has a little segment. I think it's about 15-minute segment, but really fascinating about corporate consolidation. So the show is very heavy on current and past mergers and acquisition and what M&As mean and how it affects things. So that's it for now. I have posted your fourth assignment. It's a Quiznos ethics activity. You can go straight to the assignment to here. This is through it's on your textbook, but it's obviously when you're done with it, you will post everything on Canvas. Well, I wish you guys a great weekend, and I'll see you for chapter 5.